Hi, this is Bryan Schwartzman, staff writer at the Jewish Exponent. Thursday morning I had the chance to sit down with Pennsylvania's freshman Republican Senator Pat Toomey on the same day that Toomey joined 14 of his Republican Senate colleagues in writing President Obama and requesting that the White House withdraw the nomination of Chuck Hagel for Secretary of Defense. Toomey on that day was in Philadelphia to meet with about 25 members of the Jewish community, including many Jewish Republicans, to brief them on the Hagel nomination process and answer questions on some other issues. Bob Casey, Pennsylvania's senior senator, is taking the approach that he's supporting Hagel's nomination for defense secretary. During the roughly 10-minute interview, Toomey also spoke about some of his thoughts on what the Republican Party has learned or needed to learn in the wake of November's election. So today, Senator, you signed on to a letter to the President calling on for the White House to withdraw the nomination of Chuck Hagel for Defense Secretary. I mean, that's a step beyond, I believe, you or your colleagues have taken so far. So why that step?
Yeah, and that's not something that I do lightly. The Senate has a role to play, and that the President can only populate his cabinet with people who have the advice and consent of the Senate. So that has to mean something. If you look at the facts, I disagree with Senator Hagel on a number of the policies that positions he's taken over the years. But here's something else that's very important. A defense secretary needs to have the confidence of a very broad segment of the Congress. This is someone that the Congress needs to work very closely with in implementing one of the most important functions of the federal government, if not the most important function, which is national security. Leon Panetta was confirmed with no dissenting votes, if I remember correctly, not one. There was just a broad acceptance that he was capable of doing the job, he was ready for the job, and his views were very much within the mainstream regarding American national security policy. I think Senator Hagel does not have that kind of broad bipartisan support. In fact, if he were to be confirmed, it looks at the moment as though his confirmation would have a very, very substantial number of dissents, and more perhaps than any defense secretary in the past. I just don't think this is the right person for this moment, and I thought it was important to convey that to the President and some of my colleagues.
What was the purpose of today's gathering?
Kind of just an update on a variety of topics, the state of American policy vis-a-vis Iran and Iran's obvious determination to develop nuclear weapons. There was some discussion about Senator Hagel's candidacy for defense secretary, so range of topics.
Do you see the move the senators took today as being able to stop the confirmation, or is that unclear at this point?
Well, here's the tricky part. I think there are more than 41 Republican senators who will probably vote against confirming Senator Hagel. I'm not sure that there are more than 41 who will use our power to establish a 60-vote threshold for his confirmation, which we could then, of course, deny if there were 41 of us. And that's the big test. If this were many other posts within the administration, substantial policy differences that I might have with the nominee would not rise to the level of importance for me that I would invoke the 60-vote threshold. And I have, in fact, voted for and supported a number of the President's cabinet nominees with whom I have many disagreements. But I accept that it's not reasonable for me to expect the President to appoint people who share my worldview, and it's entirely, certainly. But the Defense Secretary is so important a role at such an important moment. And I think Senator Hagel has articulated views that are well outside the mainstream of American views on security in the Middle East, the nature of the terrorist threat that we face, our relationship with Israel, too many areas. And so I think it would be prudent, I think it's appropriate for us to use our advice and consent role, in this case, to deny that consent.
Since November, we've heard a lot of talk, a lot written about whether and the Republican Party needs to rebrand itself, needs to rethink any of its policies. I mean, I haven't heard you talk much about that. What's your thinking on whether the party needs to take that kind of reflection?
You know, I think whenever an election turns out to be disappointing, you ought to look back and learn what you can from it. In my view, we don't need to change who we are and what we're about. We believe in limited government and personal freedom and a free enterprise system and individual responsibility. We believe in those things because they're right. Those are the founding principles that allowed us to build the most successful society in the history of the world and to create more opportunity and lift more people out of poverty than any other system. So I sure hope we're not going to abandon the principles that are at the founding of our republic. What I do think we need to do a better job of is explaining to ordinary Americans how our policies will result in more opportunities and a better standard of living for them. I don't think we've done as good a job as we need to do in translating policies, whether it's fiscal discipline or lower taxes or balanced budget. I don't think we've done a great job explaining why those things translate to more job opportunities for a 21-year-old college grad who can't find a job, or the 55-year-old factory worker who's been laid off and can't get back to work. We've got to make it clear to people how their lives will be better if we pursue the policies that we believe in.
What was your message today on Iran? I'm sure you were asked about it.
Well, my message was to underscore my view that a policy of containment would not be acceptable. It should not be American policy to tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran and to believe that we can contain that threat. I think it is too dangerous a regime. It is a very dangerous part of the world. There are extensive ties and very extensive support for very dangerous terrorist organizations. Makes it a completely unacceptable idea that they could be wielding nuclear weapons at the same time. So, you know, I was critical of this administration because I thought they took too long to impose the kind of aggressive sanctions that are now finally having some impact. But at the end of the day, we can't take any options off the table. We have to accept, and I think it has to be our policy, that Iran cannot be a nuclear power.